Pearl Kazim had always known life at the top, not the kind of top where you worked your way through doors and shattered ceilings. No, hers was the kind that came with crystal chandeliers, vintage champagne, and magazine covers featuring her father's billionaire oil and gas empire. At 25, Pearl was everything the Lagos elite whispered about with admiration, and sometimes envy. Tall, caramel-skinned, with wide hazel eyes and full lips that rarely smiled unless necessary, she had the commanding presence of someone who had always known what it meant to be adored. Every movement of hers was laced with poise, like a silk scarf dancing through calm air. Her wardrobe was a curated mix of Italian designer suits and locally tailored fabrics so elegant they made even the First Lady nod in approval. She wasn't just a pretty face. Pearl was a certified lawyer, top of her class from the University of Oxford, with a dual degree in corporate and international law. Upon returning to Nigeria, she immediately took up an executive counsel role in Kazim Holdings, her father's multi-billion-naira conglomerate. Her father, Chief Suleiman Kazim, worshipped the ground she walked on. As the only child of the family, her word was final. If Pearl said a board member was out, they were out. If she wanted a private villa in Ikoyi with a rooftop pool, it was signed, sealed, and delivered before sunset. Her mother, Zainab Kazim, ensured Pearl's elegance and decorum were never anything less than flawless. "You're not just our daughter," she often said with a tilt of her diamond-studded turban. "You're the name of this family, the brand." Pearl had grown up with everything: private ballet lessons, diamond-studded birthday gifts, horseback riding on their estate in Abukuta. She was escorted by bodyguards, attended dinners hosted by royalty, and walked red carpets like she was born on them. She dated when she wanted, studied where she wanted, and pursued law not because she needed to work, but because being smart was the final accessory to her already impeccable image. Still, Pearl was never reckless. She knew the weight her name carried. She guarded the family reputation with the sharpness of a queen protecting her throne. Parties were allowed, but only when it made strategic sense. Friendships? Curated like her designer bags. She didn't trust easily. And love? That was a fairy tale reserved for people who didn't have legacies to manage. Until the fairy tale of her life cracked beneath her Louboutins. One Monday morning, her father's face appeared on the news, not in celebration, but in scandal. A multi-billion-naira oil deal had gone sideways. Allegations of embezzlement, bribery, fake contracts. It was everywhere. Bellanova blog, City Talks, even CNN Africa picked it up. People whispered, friends disappeared, and overnight the Kazim name became fragile. Pearl tried to stay calm, tried to spin it in the press, but the truth was far uglier than any headline. Her father had gotten involved with some very dangerous people. Men more powerful than she imagined. Not just rich, but deeply entrenched in Nigeria's shadow politics. Men who could erase a surname from history. And one of them was Senator Danjuma. The senator had every reason to bury Chief Kazim, but he didn't. Not immediately. Instead, he offered a deal. Pearl was the deal. Khalifa Danjuma had never cared for the spotlight. While his father, Senator Musa Danjuma, wielded power with the ruthlessness of a king, Khalifa preferred the quiet, the soft hum of vinyl records in his Lekki apartment, the scent of freshly brewed hibiscus tea in the mornings, his dog, Hugo, barking excitedly when he returned from evening drives. At 31, he was what Lagos society called a wasted potential. Not because he wasn't brilliant. He had 2 degrees from the University of Cambridge, one in economics and the other in business administration, but because he didn't chase headlines. He didn't party with the children of ministers or show up at celebrity weddings with a scandalous date. He rarely showed up at all. He ran a handful of his father's logistics companies with quiet precision. Profitable, yes, but invisible. When people mentioned the Danjuma name, they spoke only of the senator, never of the reclusive son with soulful eyes and an impressive art collection. Women noticed Khalifa, but he didn't indulge. Not really. Relationships bored him. The chase was tedious, and the few times he let himself care, it ended with him being accused of being too intense or too quiet. He smiled at that. They didn't know him. No one did. Khalifa was a man who wanted depth, love, a partner. Not another influencer chasing clout. He wanted someone who'd sit with him in silence and still hear him, someone who wouldn't see him as just the senator's son. So he retreated. Until his father knocked on his door with a marriage proposal. "She's perfect for you," Senator Danjuma said, settling into Khalifa's expensive suede armchair like he owned the air in the room. "Beautiful, classy, educated, elite." Khalifa poured himself a glass of scotch, unimpressed. "I'm not looking for a wife, Baba." The senator waved a hand. "This isn't about what you're looking for. This is about your image. You don't attend fundraisers. You don't show face at business events. Do you know how many people think you're useless? Weak? I don't care what they think." "I do," his father snapped. "And so should you. The only way the Danjuma legacy moves forward is if people start seeing you as a leader, not a ghost. You need presence. And marrying Pearl Kazim? That's presence." Khalifa raised an eyebrow. "Kazim, the one whose father just—" "Exactly," the senator said, leaning forward. "She's desperate. Her father's reputation is hanging by a thread. You marry her, I erase every file linking him to my people. He lives. The family stays rich. You, my son, gain the finest trophy wife in the country. The deal is done. All you have to do is show up." Khalifa downed the scotch and walked to the window, staring out at the calm Lagos night. A strange weight settled in his chest. He didn't want a marriage of convenience, but this wasn't about want anymore. It was duty. And if he had to play prince for the sake of his father's pride and a woman's name, then let the crown rest heavy. Because he had just become Pearl Kazim's husband-to-be. Pearl Kazim had been in many boardrooms, sat across from some of the most ruthless businessmen in the country, and faced cutthroat investors without so much as a flinch. But as she stepped into the private suite at the Sapphire Towers to meet the man who would become her husband, her perfectly lined lips pressed into a cold, tight line. He was already seated when she arrived. Khalifa. Danjuma didn't rise, didn't extend a hand. He simply looked up from his espresso with a quiet, unreadable gaze. His skin was a rich brown, his beard neatly trimmed, and he wore a tailored black shirt that somehow made him look both regal and effortlessly casual. Nothing about him screamed politician's son. He looked like someone who had never needed to scream to be heard. Pearl sat across from him, crossed her legs slowly, and placed her Hermes clutch on the glass table with precision. "This is absurd," she said coolly. "You know that, right?" Khalifa tilted his head slightly. "I agree." The silence between them thickened, stretched. "I don't want to be married," she added. "Neither do I." That at least was mutual. "But here we are," he continued. "Our fathers have made their beds, and now we have to lie in them, together." Pearl scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. This isn't some twisted love poem. It's a business contract." She opened a file her family lawyer had prepared, outlining the terms of the agreement. 3 years of marriage, no public scandals, joint appearances at major functions, and an ironclad clause of mutual discretion. No one outside their legal teams would know the arrangement wasn't born of love. There would be a substantial financial incentive at the end for both of them. "If you decide to date or indulge," Pearl said without looking up, "do it quietly. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. Keep it clean." So Khalifa smiled faintly. "I don't date or indulge. I read, paint, take long drives. You won't find paparazzi on my trail." "You're lucky," she muttered, "because if this gets out, it won't be your name that bleeds. It'll be mine." He studied her. "Is that why you agreed to this?" Pearl didn't answer. She stared at the window instead, at the city sprawling beneath them like a maze of choices she didn't make. "My father made a mistake," she finally said, "but I shouldn't have to pay for it." Khalifa's voice was softer than she expected. "We both are." That stung a little more than she wanted to admit. After reviewing the documents they both signed, there was no ceremony, no ring, just 2 pens, 2 signatures, and a silence that lingered long after the ink dried. That night, Pearl sat in her walk-in closet, surrounded by dresses, heels, and the faint scent of oud perfume. She stared at the contract in her hand, now signed and sealed. 3 years. 3 years with a man she didn't know, didn't trust, and certainly didn't want. She could already imagine the whispers once society found out. Some would think she married for money. Others would call it karma. And the elite girls she'd ruled alongside? They'd laugh quietly at her fall from unattainable grace. Pearl Kazim, the girl who once had Lagos eating from her palm, was now a glorified wife in a contract she didn't draft. Still, she had made her choice. Better to marry Khalifa Danjuma than to see her father rot in disgrace. If this was her sacrifice to protect her name, her reputation, her future, so be it. She closed the contract file and reached for a glass of wine. Oh, this wouldn't be a marriage. This would be war. Meanwhile, in his secluded villa in Banana Island, Khalifa sat on his rooftop balcony, sketching lazily in his notepad. The sky above was cloudless. The city below never stopped buzzing, but up here, it was quiet. He'd expected a spoiled, dramatic heiress. Instead, Pearl Kazim had been poised, sharp, and distant, like a queen forced into exile. He respected that. But he also knew this marriage would test them both. He didn't want her love. He didn't want her trust. But he did want one thing: peace. If she could grant him that while they played this game for the world to see, then maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be hell after all. He turned a page in his sketchbook and for the first time in years began to draw a woman's silhouette. Curved, elegant, defiant. It looked like her. It was the most watched wedding of the season. The union of Pearl Kazim and Khalifa Danjuma was exactly what the press had been praying for. Elite meets elusive. A scandal buried under luxury. A trophy wife and the senator's forgotten son. It had all the makings of a high society fairy tale or tragedy. The venue was the Kazim estate in Ikoyi, transformed into a floral paradise. White orchids cascaded from crystal chandeliers, golden chairs lined the aisle, and security was tighter than at a presidential inauguration. Every detail screamed opulence, but beneath the sparkle, Pearl felt nothing but hollowness. Her dress was hand-sewn in Paris, a strapless, shimmering ivory gown that fit her like liquid glass. Her makeup was flawless, her hair swept into a bun that revealed every angle of her high cheekbones. Cameras flashed as she stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, her mother whispering prayers under her breath. "Smile," Zainab Kazim said through gritted teeth. "This is your stage." Pearl did. Not because she felt joy, but because she was trained to. As she walked down the aisle, the crowd gasped. She was stunning, regal, everything the society expected. But her eyes, cold, calculated, her heels hit the ground like war drums. At the altar, Khalifa stood in a charcoal gray agbadai, clean-cut, hands tucked behind his back. He didn't smile either. He only watched her approach with the calm of someone who had long accepted his fate. Their vows were pre-written, brief, polished. "I, Pearl, take you, Khalifa, to be my partner in strength and in silence. For 3 years and no more," she whispered under her breath after the official line. His lips twitched. "I do." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause thundered. The elite stood to clap, photos were taken, videos rolled. But there was no kiss, no hand-holding, just two powerful surnames merging under the veil of diplomacy. Their reception was even grander. Performances by Nigeria's top artists, Michelin star catering, helicopters flying in wine from Italy, and still beneath the glow of chandeliers in the taste of caramelized suya, Pearl sat at the high table beside a man she didn't know, posing for cameras, laughing politely, sipping water like it was poison. Khalifa barely said a word. He wasn't rude, just silent. They moved like ghosts through this celebration, shaking hands, accepting blessings, offering rehearsed smiles. He let her lead. She let him disappear when needed. It was perfect choreography, but the music didn't touch her heart. By 9 p.m., they were whisked away in a custom Maybach to his Banana Island home. The Danjuma villa wasn't what Pearl expected. She thought she'd be walking into a cold marble fortress full of servants and grandeur. Instead, the home was quiet, artistic, and unexpectedly warm. High ceilings, soft jazz playing in the background, an entire wall dedicated to Khalifa's paintings, abstracts in deep earth tones, velvet couches, candles instead of chandeliers. It felt lived in. "You live here alone?" she asked, glancing at the minimalist but elegant space. "Just me and Hugo," he said, gesturing toward a massive German shepherd curled near the fireplace. Pearl didn't know what to do with that. She had expected detachment, yes, but not depth. He led her to the guest room, spacious, soft lit, a view of the lagoon. "This is yours," he said, "unless you prefer something else." She looked at him, surprised. "You're not assuming we'll share a bed?" He gave a half smile. "Why would I assume that? We're partners, not lovers." Pearl nodded, unsure if she was grateful or insulted. She chose to be grateful. He handed her a small gold box. Inside was a phone, a new SIM card, and a credit card in her name. "This is for appearances," he said. "We'll need to go out together, host dinners, attend public events. Once or twice a month, max. The rest of the time, you're free to live your life. Just don't drag the Danjuma name into headlines." Pearl's brow arched. "And what do you do all day when you're not playing house?" "I build businesses, paint, avoid people. And now?" He looked her straight in the eye. "Now I pretend to be a husband." She laughed then. It was cold, bitter. "Well, cheers to that." That night, Pearl stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her new room, sipping mint tea, staring at the glowing skyline of Lagos. Somewhere in the same house, her husband was sketching, alone. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was intentional. Two strangers, one roof, 3 years. A week after the wedding, Lagos was still buzzing. The heiress and the hermit. The most unexpected marriage in high society. Pearl Kazim and Khalifa Danjuma. Power or pity? The headlines were relentless. Even the morning papers that once praised Pearl for her courtroom brilliance now gossiped about her smile, or lack of it, at the wedding. Blog after blog speculated about her motives. Was it love? Desperation? A deal? And why was Khalifa Danjuma suddenly making appearances after years of social silence? Pearl ignored it all, or at least tried to, until the gala. It was a fundraiser hosted by the First Lady herself, an annual black tie event held at the Echo Atlantic Presidential Hall, drawing everyone from oil tycoons to governors' wives. Khalifa had initially declined the invitation, but his father sent a message through one of his aides. "You're married now. Time to show face. Take your wife." Pearl had dressed herself in a wine-colored satin gown with a plunging back, the kind that made photographers fumble with their flashes. She styled her hair in a loose chignon and wore diamonds that once belonged to her grandmother. Beside her, Khalifa wore a custom black tuxedo, crisp white shirt, no tie. Understated, sharp, dangerous in the way quiet men sometimes are. They entered the gala hand in hand, not because they meant to, but because the cameras demanded it. Whispers followed them. "She's too beautiful for him. Look how uninterested he looks. She didn't even post a wedding picture. Suspicious." Pearl heard it all, smiled through it. She'd been raised for this. They posed together briefly, his hand firm around her waist as they stood before a branded backdrop. The flashbulbs burst like firecrackers. Then they moved inside where champagne flowed and insincere greetings buzzed in the air. Pearl kept the conversation light with diplomats and socialites. Khalifa stood beside her, calm, unreadable. Until she arrived. Sasha Bello, former Miss Nigeria, social media influencer, and one of the most popular faces in Lagos high society. She walked in wearing a golden beaded gown that clung like second skin and headed straight for Pearl with a venomous smile. "Darling," she drawled, kissing the air near Pearl's cheek. "You look stunning. Marriage suits you, or at least your wardrobe." Pearl smiled coldly. "And you look exactly as expected." Sasha's gaze slid to Khalifa. "Khalifa," she purred, "it's been a while. Didn't think I'd see you out here in the real world." Even hermits need air sometimes, he said, barely looking at her. Sasha laughed, but it sounded forced. I have to say, when I heard the news, I was shocked. Pearl? Really? She's so, how do I say this, controlled. Pearl's nails dug into her champagne flute. The insult was disguised as flattery, but it was a slap. Sasha turned back to Khalifa. But maybe that's what you need, someone to keep you hidden. Pearl opened her mouth, but Khalifa spoke first. Actually, he said slowly, placing his glass on a nearby table, I don't think I've ever met anyone more seen than Pearl. Sasha blinked. She's smart, smarter than most of the people in this room. She's elegant, strategic, and unlike you, Sasha, she doesn't need filters or followers to prove her worth. A hush fell. Pearl stared at him. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Sasha laughed awkwardly, stepping back. Well then, I suppose I'll just enjoy the fundraiser. She vanished into the crowd like smoke. Pearl turned to Khalifa. Why did you do that? He shrugged, sipping his drink. Because she was out of line, and I'm not the type to stand by while my wife is insulted. My wife? The words echoed in her mind. It wasn't affection. It wasn't flirtation. But it was respect. And in this world, that was rare. Later that night, back at the villa, Pearl removed her earrings in front of the mirror and caught Khalifa watching her from the doorway. You didn't have to defend me, she said, not meeting his eyes. I've handled worse. I know, he replied, but maybe you shouldn't have to handle it alone anymore. She turned. That sounds dangerously close to care. He smirked. Don't get used to it. She rolled her eyes, but something warm flickered behind her cool exterior. Maybe this wouldn't be love. Maybe it wouldn't even be friendship. But tonight, for the first time, it felt like something real. A crack in the wall between them. And maybe, just maybe, that crack was enough to let something grow. By the following week, the media had a new favorite phrase, the Khalifa Danjuma effect. Suddenly, Khalifa was no longer the mysterious recluse or the senator's invisible son. He was the quietly powerful man who defended his wife at a high society event and did it with grace. Social media exploded with clips of his words. She doesn't need filters or followers to prove her worth. And just like that, people started to watch him. Fashion pages called him the silent force of Banana Island. Business columns speculated on his next moves. Photos of him and Pearl began circulating. Him holding the door open, her glancing at him with curious eyes. Both of them side by side at a brunch for breast cancer awareness. The city was eating it up, and so was the narrative. Pearl Kazim had tamed the invisible Danjuma, but the truth was quieter. At home, the villa remained calm. They didn't rush into closeness. Their routines remained separate. But something had changed in the air. The way they greeted each other in the mornings. The way she lingered longer in the living room when he read. The way he looked up when she laughed during phone calls. And one Friday evening, the change became undeniable. It had been a long day. Pearl had returned from court, heels in hand, her makeup smudged, her body aching. She dumped her files on the kitchen island and opened a bottle of red wine, pouring herself a generous glass. As she sipped, she noticed Khalifa's study door ajar. Normally it was closed. Always. It was his world. His only private space in a house where privacy already ruled. But tonight the door was open, and inside, soft jazz was playing. Curious, Pearl walked over. She didn't knock, just hovered, watching. Khalifa stood before a canvas, barefoot, paint on his shirt. He hadn't heard her. His brush moved slowly, deliberately, filling in shadows on what appeared to be a portrait. His expression was softer than she had ever seen it, focused, calm, almost vulnerable. The canvas held a woman. Her back was turned, but the figure was unmistakable. Tall, graceful, hair swept up. It was her, Pearl's breath caught. He turned just then, startled to find her there. I didn't hear you. I didn't mean to intrude. He set the brush down gently. You didn't. They stood in silence. Not uncomfortable, just full. You're painting me? she asked, her voice low. I didn't mean to. It started as a silhouette, he admitted, brushing a hand over his forehead. But it became you. She stepped closer, drawn to the portrait. It wasn't perfect. The lines were raw, unfinished. But it captured something photos never could: stillness and strength wrapped in beauty. No one's ever seen me like this, she murmured. That's because they don't look, he said. They only see the image, the headlines, the heels and suits. But I see the girl who walks barefoot into the kitchen at midnight, the woman who reads court transcripts like novels, the person who presses her thumb against her wineglass when she's thinking. Pearl turned to him, stunned. He looked away, a little embarrassed. I observe people, that's all. She moved closer and, without thinking, placed a hand on his chest. You observe, but no one observes you. He didn't respond, but his eyes softened. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, warm beneath her palm. And for the first time, Pearl saw the man. Not the senator's son, not her contract husband, just a man, gentle, quiet, craving connection and terrified of being misread. She whispered, Do you ever get tired of pretending you don't care? He exhaled, all the time. Their eyes locked. The silence spoke louder than anything either of them could say. And in that moment, Pearl realized something terrifying. This man didn't need fixing. He needed seeing. Not admiration, not worship, just a safe space to be. That night, she didn't return to her room. She didn't cross into his either. Instead, they sat side by side in the living room, barefoot and still dressed in their day's clothes, sharing a second bottle of wine and talking. About music, art, courtrooms, grief, dreams, laughter. When she laughed, he watched her like sunlight had just touched a part of his world he thought would always be dark. At one point, their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away. It wasn't love yet. It wasn't passion. But it was something. A beginning. And for once, Pearl didn't feel like a trophy wife. She felt like a woman discovering a man who had never been truly held. When Khalifa told Pearl they'd be attending his cousin's private business retreat in Abuja, she barely looked up from her legal drafts. A weekend away? She said dryly. We barely speak during the week. We speak enough, he replied, his tone lighter than usual. And besides, people are watching us now. My cousin's circle is influential. If we don't show up together, it'll raise questions. Pearl sighed and set her papers aside. Fine, but I'm not playing dress-up for your rich friends. He gave a half smile. You never have to. You're always the center of every room anyway. She looked up surprised, but he'd already walked away. The retreat estate in Abuja sat on rolling hills surrounded by cypress trees and tranquil pools. The setting was peaceful, elegant, and so far removed from Lagos pressure that Pearl almost let herself relax. They arrived Friday afternoon, and from the moment they walked in, eyes followed them. Pearl in a flowy emerald jumpsuit, heels clicking against polished stone. Khalifa in a navy caftan, hands in his pockets, exuding quiet dominance. People whispered, She's glowing. He's changed. He's visible. Marriage suits him. As the day unfolded, Pearl noticed how women, beautiful, confident women, lingered when they spoke to Khalifa. They touched his arm when they laughed. They leaned in too close. One woman in particular, Tari, a family friend with a wide smile and sharp wit, seemed especially bold. Do you remember our trip to Seychelles? Tari asked him during the cocktail hour, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass. You swore you'd never come back married. Khalifa gave a polite chuckle. Well, I've been known to surprise even myself. Pearl stood nearby, pretending not to listen, but her stomach churned. She wasn't used to this feeling, possessiveness, uncertainty, not when it came to men. But Khalifa was different. Later that night, after the crowd thinned and the candles burned low, Pearl sat on the edge of the guest suite's terrace, arms crossed, looking out at the starlit hills. He joined her, holding 2 mugs of steaming hibiscus tea. You've been quiet since dinner. he said, handing her one. Didn't feel like speaking, she muttered. He studied her. Was it Tari? She froze. She's harmless, he added, and irrelevant. Pearl met his eyes. You've known her long? Yes. Have you? She stopped herself. He tilted his head. Have I slept with her? No. The air between them shifted. I'm not used to feeling jealous, she said softly. But tonight, watching her talk to you like she knew you, it bothered me, and I hated that it did. He moved closer. I haven't given myself to anyone since this arrangement started, Pearl. She looked at him, heart thudding. Why? His voice was barely a whisper. Because somewhere between pretending, I started wanting this to be real. She blinked. Then he touched her face, brushing a curl away from her cheek. I don't want to keep watching you from a distance anymore, he murmured. Pearl leaned in, slowly, carefully, and when their lips met, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't fire. It was reverence. He kissed her like she was rare, sacred, and she let him. They didn't speak as they moved through the suite, hands finding fabric, mouths tracing skin. It was slow, almost hesitant, as if both were afraid to break the spell. When Khalifa reached for the zipper of her silk robe, she stilled. His hands paused. Are you okay? She nodded, but something in her eyes gave him pause. Monked, you've done this before, right? He asked gently. She swallowed hard. No. He froze. What? I haven't, she said softly, avoiding his gaze. I always thought I'd wait for someone who truly saw me. He stared at her. And suddenly everything shifted. The powerful heiress, the sharp-tongued lawyer, the Queen of Lagos, was untouched. Not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. She had waited, guarded, protected herself not just physically, but emotionally. And she had chosen him. Khalifa cradled her face, his expression unreadable. Are you sure you want me to be your first? She nodded slowly. I've never been more sure of anything. What followed was nothing like the awkward fumbling most people expected. He moved with care, reverence, devotion, and she followed his lead, breathless and shaking but fearless. He pushed her leg aside and sank inside her. She groaned and arched, forcing him to speed up to a faster pace. His fingers clenched over her thigh and he moved harder, deeper, shafting her in long, fast strokes. Delicious. She slid her hands down over his back, slick with sweat, and grasped his pumping buttocks. He pressed his mouth against her neck and kissed her, his tongue working over her sensitive skin. Fuck, he mumbled. It wasn't wild, it wasn't loud, but it was deep. And when she whispered his name in the dark, Khalifa Danjuma, silent, guarded Khalifa, felt something inside him break open. He held her afterward, tighter than he intended. Neither of them spoke, but neither of them let go. Pearl woke to sunlight kissing her bare shoulder. The warmth of Khalifa's arm wrapped around her waist. For a brief moment, she didn't move. She just let the silence fill her. This didn't feel like a contract anymore. It felt like something real. She turned slowly to face him. He was still asleep, his lashes long against his cheeks, his expression peaceful. It was the first time she had ever seen him so unguarded. Vulnerability looked good on him. So did the way his chest rose and fell with quiet rhythm, anchoring her in a world that had always felt too unstable. He stirred as she traced a finger down his collarbone. Morning, he murmured, his voice rough and low. Pearl smiled. Morning. They didn't talk about the night before. They didn't need to. The connection lingered in the way he kissed her shoulder, how he made her breakfast himself, burnt toast and all, and how he reached for her hand when they stepped outside to the waiting cars. Later that day, during their return flight to Lagos, Khalifa did something he'd never done before. He placed his hand on her thigh, leaned in, and kissed her forehead, right there, in front of his bodyguard, his cousin, the staff. Pearl blinked. What was that for? He didn't even hesitate. Because you're mine now. By the following week, their dynamic had shifted in ways that were impossible to hide. Pearl found herself watching him when he worked, sitting longer at the dinner table just to hear him talk about logistics, or design, or how he found colors in dreams. She laughed more, smiled more. Khalifa, too, had softened. He touched her often now, a hand on the small of her back, a finger brushing her jawline, lips against her knuckles. And he watched her like she was the only reality in a world full of noise. Then came the threat. It arrived in the form of a single envelope slipped under the villa gate in the dead of night. Inside, a flash drive and a note. If you don't want your father's offshore accounts broadcasted to the Senate committee, deliver N$100 million. You have 72 hours. Pearl read it 3 times before her hands began to shake. She showed it to Khalifa without a word. He took one look at the note, then the flash drive, then back at her. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but her voice trembled. If this gets out, my father won't just go to prison. The Kazim name will be annihilated. And me? I'll be the lawyer who defended a thief for a father. Khalifa said nothing. He walked to the window, dialed a number, and spoke in Hausa, sharp, clipped. Then he called someone else. A fixer, from the sound of it. A man named Waziri. Pearl paced. What do we do? Pay them? Go to the police? No police, Khalifa said. Then what? He turned to her, eyes blazing. I handle it. Her brows furrowed. What does that mean? It means no one threatens what's mine. Pearl stared. I'm not. Yes, you are, he interrupted, voice firm. You are mine, Pearl. And if they come for you, they come through me. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Khalifa tightened security around the estate. No staff entered without triple clearance. His personal tech team hacked the flash drive and traced its origin to a former Kazim Holdings associate, someone her father had cut off years ago after a failed partnership. Bastard wants revenge, Khalifa muttered, and money. Pearl watched him, move like a different man, commanding, ruthless, efficient. The quiet artist she'd grown used to had vanished. In his place was the son of a senator who knew exactly how to wield power when it mattered. And he was doing it for her. Pearl's father, unaware, sat in a private hospital in Dubai, still recovering from a mild stroke. Her mother begged her not to panic, but Pearl did panic, until Khalifa walked into her room that evening and held up a phone. Watch, she pressed play. A video popped up. The blackmailer, handcuffed, bruised, surrounded by local security, his confession caught on tape. Every detail, every lie. Khalifa leaned on the doorway. The press won't get this. The footage is encrypted and stored in 5 separate locations. The N$100 million never left my account. Pearl stared at him, stunned. How did you? I told you, he said quietly. No one touches you, ever. She crossed the room and threw her arms around him, burying her face into his chest. You didn't have to go this far, she whispered. Yes, I did, he replied. You're not just my contract anymore, Pearl. You're my peace, my person. Her heart cracked open, and this time she let it. Pearl had never been afraid of words. She built her life on them. Arguments in court, interviews on national TV, crisp statements in glossy magazines. Words were her weapon, her currency. But now, seated beside Khalifa under the soft lights of their rooftop terrace, her throat tightened. He had just finished telling her about the blackmailer's final statement, how the man had admitted he only targeted Pearl to get to her father, how Khalifa had personally ensured he would face full legal prosecution. Pearl listened, nodded, even smiled. But beneath all that calm was a war. Because what shook her most wasn't the threat. It was how completely Khalifa had protected her, how fiercely he had moved into action, how deeply he had started to matter. She set her wineglass down and turned to him. Khalifa. He looked up. There's something I need to say, and I'm not saying it because I feel grateful or because you saved me. He waited. I'm saying it because it's the truth now, and I don't want to keep pretending this is still just a contract. She took a breath. I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air like a dare. He didn't speak. Her heart dropped. She laughed awkwardly, trying to mask the sting. "You don't have to say anything. I know this wasn't the plan. Maybe it's too soon or too strange or—" "I love you too," he said quietly. Pearl froze. He leaned forward, his voice steady, but his eyes burning. "I don't just want this marriage to work. I want you, all of you. The girl who stands in stilettos like they're battle boots. The woman who gives up her pride to protect her family. The lawyer. The daughter. The girl who looked me in the eye and gave herself to me fully, when no one ever had." Her lips trembled. "You were never just a trophy," he said. "You're the win." Pearl's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything," he whispered. "If you want out after 3 years, I won't stop you, but I will spend every moment until then showing you why staying is the better choice." She took his face in her hands. "I don't want out." "What?" "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not for the contract, not for appearances. For us. I want us to try, to really try. I want to wake up next to you and know I'm not pretending. I want to build something real." Khalifa pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was air, and he had been suffocating for years. "You're home now," he murmured into her hair. "With me." That night, they tore the contract to pieces together, ripped paper fluttering like leaves across the living room floor. They didn't need it anymore. No more pretending. No more rules. No more timelines. They were choosing each other, freely, fully. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. Pearl took a short break from court to focus on launching a pro bono initiative for young girls interested in law. Khalifa introduced her to the core team behind his creative tech startup, and she joined as co-legal advisor. Their relationship blossomed not just behind doors, but in boardrooms, interviews, and Sunday family brunches. Photos of them hand in hand began to circulate, not for PR, but because they were genuinely inseparable. Pearl began to smile in those photos, laugh even, and for the first time in years, Khalifa was seen in public and in love. One evening, as they lounged on the balcony, barefoot, sharing jollof rice from one bowl, Pearl rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "This is the life I never knew I wanted." Khalifa kissed her forehead. "And you," he said, "are the woman I never thought I deserved, but I'll spend my whole life proving I do." 2 months later, the Kazim name was officially restored. The charges against Pearl's father were dropped discreetly after the truth about the blackmailer was revealed in court. Though the scandal would always leave a faint scar, it no longer defined the family. Pearl sat beside her father in the garden of their estate in Abu Quda, his once strong hands now slightly frail but warm as ever. "I thought I ruined your life," he said softly. Pearl shook her head. "No, Baba. You gave me the one thing you never planned to, freedom." He looked at her, confused. "I lived all my life trying to be who people expected me to be," she continued. "But marrying Khalifa, it was the first thing I didn't choose. Yet I'm glad it happened, because it led me to my truth." Her father sighed. "And that truth is?" She smiled. "That I'm deeply, truly in love with my husband. Not the senator's son, not the reclusive heir, but the man who saw me when I was just a name, and stayed when he didn't have to." Back in Lagos, Khalifa was planning something. He became unusually quiet one Friday morning, pacing, making cryptic calls, whispering to the housekeeper, checking his watch every 15 minutes. Pearl noticed, but didn't pry. That evening, he asked her to wear the same dress she wore the night of their wedding reception, the burgundy satin one that made her glow like wine in moonlight. When she stepped out of the room, her breath caught. The entire rooftop had been transformed. Candlelight, soft jazz, flowers in shades of blush, ivory, and gold. And there, standing in a crisp white shirt and soft black trousers, was Khalifa. No photographers, no guests, just them. Pearl blinked. "What is this?" He walked up slowly, took her hands. I never gave you a proper proposal, he said. You signed a contract. We followed rules. But now I want to ask the only question that's ever really mattered. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple ring. Gold, engraved with the initials KP. Pearl Kazim, he said, voice steady. Will you marry me? Again. This time not because our fathers asked, not because of a deal, but because I choose you, over and over, in every lifetime, in every world. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into the warmest, softest kiss she'd ever known. No cameras, no contracts, just love, real, flawed, healing love. A few weeks later, they held a private ceremony by the sea in Elisha. Close friends, family, a handwritten vow exchange beneath the twilight sky. Pearl wore an off-shoulder gown that shimmered like morning light on water. Khalifa cried when he saw her. I spent so much of my life hiding, he said in his vows, but you made me brave again. Pearl smiled through tears. And you made me whole. 1 year later, they stood at the balcony of their new villa, overlooking the lagoon. Pearl's belly, just beginning to show, moved under her hand. Khalifa wrapped his arms around her from behind. Do you ever think about how we started? She asked. He chuckled. You mean the contract marriage to protect your father's legacy? She laughed. Yeah, that. I think about it all the time, he said, because it brought me to the best thing I've ever had. She turned in his arms. Me? He kissed her nose. You, us, this baby, the life we built. Pearl laid her head on his chest, eyes closed. Who would have thought the sweetest trophy would be the one I get to keep forever? Khalifa held her tighter. No, Pearl, you were never the trophy. You were the prize. Banana Island, 5 years later. The Danjuma estate was no longer just a villa. It was a home, warm, lived in, filled with art, music, baby laughter, and the scent of fresh hibiscus tea that Khalifa still brewed every morning. Pearl Danjuma, formerly Kazim, still every bit the elegant storm, stood barefoot in the center of their lush garden. Her 5-year-old daughter, Zara, running circles around her in a yellow sundress. Mommy, watch me! Zara squealed, spinning. Pearl laughed, hand resting on her rounded belly. Baby number 2 was due in a few weeks, and though her ankles ached and her back protested, her heart had never felt more full. She looked up just in time to see Khalifa walking toward them, baby boy Noah, barely 1 and already ruling the household, balanced on his shoulder. He looked older now, wiser. Still quiet, but no longer guarded. His eyes crinkled when he smiled, and his voice carried a warmth that used to be hidden behind stillness. Time hadn't dulled him. It had softened his edges just enough to let his light shine through. Zara, he called out, slow down before you turn into a whirlwind. But I am a whirlwind, she giggled, dashing into his arms. He lifted her easily and kissed her forehead. Pearl watched them, heart aching in the best way. That evening, as the children napped and the sky painted itself in streaks of pink and gold, Pearl and Khalifa sat on the terrace, sipping fresh mango juice and listening to old jazz records. You still haven't told me your birthday wish, Pearl teased, leaning her head on his shoulder. He looked at her, eyes full. I have everything I ever wanted, and more than I thought I deserved. She smiled. Even the chaos? He chuckled. Especially the chaos. It's mine. It's ours. A gentle breeze passed between them. Khalifa reached for her hand, fingers threading through hers. You know, he said after a long pause, 5 years ago, I thought marriage was a punishment, a performance. But then you happened, and now, I don't remember who I was before you. Pearl kissed his knuckles. We found each other in the most unlikely way, Khalifa, but I wouldn't change a single thing. He turned to her fully. Promise me something. Anything. When the world gets loud again, and work pulls us in different directions, and the kids are throwing tantrums and paint on the walls, promise me you'll still choose me. She looked into his eyes, voice soft. Every day, in every version of this life, I choose you. He smiled. Then let's keep blooming. And as the stars blinked to life overhead, they sat in the quiet of a love no longer borrowed, but built. Real. Rooted. Forever. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Forever. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.